Welcome back. We're discussing the role of China's military as it continues to rise of global influence. Joining me for this part of the program from Beijing, Zou Yue is the head of the anchor team for CCTV International and host of China 24. From California, Vasily Kashin is a senior researcher at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Yue, let me start with you. We know that tensions have been rising between China and the United States over the South China Sea. Yet, despite these strains, China and the US continue to cooperate with each other militarily, as well as military exchanges between the two countries. Why does China put such a priority on this military cooperation as well as exchanges?
Let's talk about RIMPAC first. We know it started the RIMPAC Pacific Maritime Exercise in 2014, but this year is a little different. It happened after the ruling by the PCA in The Hague delivered a verdict on the South China Sea, which is overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines and condemned by China. And after the ruling, the U.S. have sent 2 carrier groups to the South China Sea to assert itself in support for its ally. And China launched a large-scale live fire drill near the Xisha paracel involving strategic bombers, guided missile destroyers, and submarines, all carrying anti-ship missiles with strong aerial denied intent, obviously. And interestingly, the USS John Stennis, one carrier which was still facing off with the Chinese several days ago, sailed back to Hawaii for RIMPAC. So did the Chinese Navy do this too? It sent 5 warships and 1,200 servicemen to join the RIMPAC exercise, although there was strong opposition inside the U.S. Senator John McCain even plainly said the U.S. should bar China from drill to show its disapproval of China's posturing. I think for both the U.S. and China, this kind of a joint maritime exercise is important in the sense that the armed forces of the nations can plan together to lay out their rules and make sure they operate from the same sheet of music for better cooperation and, even more importantly, for better knowledge of one another. To avoid miscalculation and misjudgment, the best way is to keep your line of communication open all the time.
Vasily, let's look at cooperation between the Chinese and Russian militaries. They have strengthened in recent years. Why are these two countries cooperating with each other more and more now?
Well, our cooperation started to expand rapidly since 2005, and since that time we have yearly large-scale exercises. And there have been a continuous progress. Exercises grew more complicated, more sophisticated every year. Since 2012, we have large-scale naval exercises. We have Chinese participation in various military competitions in Russia, like the best tank crew, the best airborne unit, etc. So we have serious progress in interoperability and very good understanding of each other's capabilities. It's like growing steadily over a long period of time. It has not started like in the last couple of years.
You talked a moment ago about the RIMPAC exercises which are taking place in the Pacific, and we see there China's military outreach by taking part in these exercises. Where else does China see more opportunities for international cooperation?
Of course, there are a lot of areas that China has been seeking out international cooperation. I want to talk one thing, that is the PLA's role in peacekeeping. China has actually met a strong demand in peacekeeping. In total, the United Nations has summoned 40,000 troops of peacekeepers, according to the summit in 2015. But since 2008, the number of major conflicts has tripled around the world. There are simply more troubles than troubleshooters. Then China stepped up its role in peacekeeping, sending police squad, building peacekeeping force, providing medical training and support to the crises areas. China is providing public goods to the world not simply because it can, but also because it should. With the world's second largest economy and a growing military force, China understands people around the world expect more from a growing power with more responsibilities. But of course, it is not without price. A Chinese peacekeeper died and 7 wounded in a terror attack in Mali. And just days ago, 2 Chinese soldiers died in peacekeeping missions in South Sudan. Casualties of peacekeepers are expected, but still painful. I think probably that's why the U.S. still prefers training foreign peacekeepers rather than sending its own soldiers.
Vasily, there have been concerns expressed about Chinese-Russian military cooperation. Last year, there was a report released here in the United States by the United States military, which said that China and Russia pose the largest military threat right now. How would you respond to something like that?
Well, of course, the relations between United States and Russia and United States and China are deteriorating rather rapidly in the recent years. But the cooperation started long before that. There are no signs that we are planning even for the future to operate together in a major conflict. However, there is growth of interoperability and possible preparation for possible joint counter-terrorism missions, disaster relief, counter-piracy missions, etc., especially in the mutual areas of concern like Central Asia if something major happens. So it started long before our relations with the West started to deteriorate, and it will continue even if the relations with the United States improve.
And Yue, how would you respond to something like that when you hear that, you know, China poses the largest military threat? As you've just pointed out, the Chinese military, to a large extent, have been involved in humanitarian missions. Right now, there are medical vessels in the Caribbean and in South America providing services to people in that part of the world. And of course, there's all the peacekeeping missions that you've talked about as well. Yet, the United States says it poses a threat to security.
I don't think so. I think it's the other way around. China and Russia do not pose a threat to the West. The other way around is China and Russia feel increasing threat at its doorsteps because of the West. For Russia, that is, of course, NATO expansion. The fault line is in Ukraine. And for China, that is, of course, in the South China Sea. The increasing alliance between U.S. and those countries surrounding China. After the Cold War, the United States is the only remaining superpower. All the other countries of major military powers are not even close to the U.S. capabilities. So I think it is very natural and inevitable for China and Russia to cozy up.
Vasily, Russia and Kazakhstan are holding the International Army Games this year, and China is hosting the joint Sea 2016 drills. That's also later this year. Russia will be there, of course. Why is this relationship one that both countries prioritize?
Well, we are very much interested in expanding this relationship because the roles of our armed forces are evolving. For example, China is interested in a greater number of naval exchanges because China is building a major blue water navy which will be capable of presence all around the world, and we also are interested in exchanges with the Chinese forces which have their specific experience and new equipment that allows us to operate better in a situation of crisis, and this cooperation will deepen and expand. It's expanding every year. It covers areas of it never covered before, like some technical support, logistical missions, medicine, transport, airstrike operations, reconnaissance, counterterrorism operations. We have a lot of small activities and exercises which are covering pretty much everything from counterterrorism to ballistic missile defense.
Yue, China continues its rise as a global power, and this question is more about its strategy. It's a little bit about politics. What role will the People's Liberation Army play globally as China continues to gain more influence in the international arena?
Let's talk about the history first. Actually, China fought at least 3 wars since 1950 against India and former Soviet Union in the 1960s and against Vietnam in the 1970s. And those were not full-blown wars, of course, but those were fought over territories. Since the 1970s, China had been single-mindedly focusing on economic development and have exhausted all the means to avoid conflicts. This was not easy in the first place because as a continental nation, China has the most neighbors on its borders, 20 to be exact, 14 on land and 16 on the sea. By the way, America has just 2 land neighbors. So with America's pivot to Asia policy, we might expect more confrontations between the 2 largest militaries in the Pacific, in the West Pacific. But I believe a shooting war between 2 nuclear major powers is simply unimaginable, if not impossible, because that basically means the end of the world as we know it. And before that happened, the world economy would already have collapsed.
Vasily, Russia and China recently signed some major arms deals. You've written about this. You said in a piece for the Carnegie Moscow Center that the 2 countries may be approaching a new, quote, golden age in arms exports and imports. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, we signed 2 major deals. One is S-400 SAM systems, another is Su-35 fighters, which will be delivered to China. Historically, the maximum volume of Russian arms exports to China was $2.7 billion per year. That was reached in early 2000s, in 2002. Before these deals, our export volume was in different years between $1.5 and $2 billion. With these new deals, we will probably get closer to the previous record levels. And there is also new area of cooperation. China is starting to export some of the defense technology to Russia. Since we have encountered Western sanctions, we cannot procure certain kinds of equipment in the West. There is already the first example, Chinese naval diesels for patrol ships and small missile ships. There are also new deals being discussed on exchange of our liquid fuel rocket engine technology to the Chinese space electronic components technology, which will also expand our cooperation. And possibly in the future, there will be new major areas of cooperations where the Chinese have their pockets of excellence. For example, that could be UAVs or some types of naval ship power plants. So we can be optimistic about the expansion. And we are also providing growing number of research and development services for the Chinese. We are being subcontracted a lot of research and development work for major Chinese projects in defense and dual technology areas.
Yue, one final question, and that is, what do you think is the greatest misperception in the West about the Chinese military and the role that it plays?
I think the greatest misconception is probably about the grand strategy of China's military. I recall Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, once said, "We maintain peace through our strengths. Weakness only invites aggression." Well, the Americans believe in this, and the Chinese actually has been living by this, not for 240 years, probably for 2,000 years. And this is the most important mantra that Chinese still believe in. And there is another set of beliefs that is also created 2,000 years, that is cited by Sun Tzu, that is, we don't have to subdue the enemy by using the force. you don't have to prove the use of your weapons by pulling the trigger. Sometimes posturing may be the better way. And I think this is what the Chinese has been doing. The Chinese has been deploying its capabilities in order to keep the opponents at some distance, not getting too close up, not to spread itself all over the world. I think when it step up against any militaries in the world, China will not be an easy pushover, but I also do not believe that China will overspend its military to become an aggressive power in any time soon.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Zou Yue, Vasily Kashin, thanks to both of you for joining us.